Teaching a child to request for their wants and needs through spoken language isn't always the best approach to help a child talk. Sometimes an augmentative communication system is needed to help them gain this important skill called Manding. Now, there are several systems out there, so which should you use? Well, stick around to find out my recommendations on how to teach early Manding skills and start implementing strategies to get your child to start requesting and ultimately using their spoken language ability. Hi, I'm Robert Schramm, a behavior analyst, an education specialist, author, and dad. And each week I share strategies to help you find the path to real progress for your kids who might be struggling. If you haven't already, click subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our important parenting videos. Recently, I released a podcast episode that was all about teaching language. And in today's video, I wanted to highlight a few of the important concepts I covered in that episode related to using augmentative communication systems and their role in helping children learn to request for their wants and their needs. I produce a new podcast episode every week, so if you like what you see or hear in this clip, consider tuning in for future podcast episodes via the links in the description. When a child cannot imitate sounds, or for whatever reason will not do so on request, teaching a child to mand with spoken language is not a reasonable target. Instead, we need to find a physical response that can be very specific, meaning one movement or selection equals one thing and another movement or selection equals something else. And this is where some form of augmentative communication system would be important. There are several augmentative communication systems that are available to us. All have their pluses and minuses, but the one thing they all have in common is that and that's crucially important, is that they're easy to physically prompt. That means we can help the child to use the behavior, allowing them to come in contact with reinforcement. It's veritably impossible to physically prompt someone to say something, as spoken language relies on a complex combination of factors, such as the opening and closing and vibrations of the vocal cords, the correct tongue placement, mouth shape, as well as the specific airflow and control. So it can be quite complex to someone who has to learn to do each part through trial and error practice. And none of that, aside from some simple help with mouth positioning, is something that we can physically prompt. At best, we can use model or imitative prompts. And for many kids without the ability to physically prompt them, we cannot get them to use the behavior we want to reinforce, and therefore cannot show them the benefit of that behavior and help them to practice using it more and more frequently. So this is why augmentative communication systems are so important to use. The three main systems you can use to help augment the learning process of spoken language are sign language, the picture exchange communication system called PECS, and the use of an electronic talking device or software. That is something where you push a button and the device then says the word for you. Now, all three of these systems are easily and physically promptable. So in addition to working on your verbal imitation from last week's episode, you also have to choose which augmentative system is best for this individual child to use. Not as a substitute or a replacement, but as a bridge to spoken language. So how do you choose? Well, I'm not going to try to convince you that one is better than the others, but I will quickly mention some of their pros and cons. Sign language. The main pro is that it is not selection-based, where PECS and the talker device are both selection-based, meaning the behavior is always the same. You reach and grab, or you reach and touch a button. With sign language, you do a different behavior for each and everything that you want the child to ask for. And although this can make it more difficult to learn initially, it does mimic actual language and therefore might make the jump from sign language to spoken language easier. But to be honest, I don't have any evidence that shows this to be the case. It is merely a hypothesis as far as I know. The downside to sign language is that it can be more challenging to teach, especially to children who have a limited motor imitation repertoire. Maybe they have weak motor skills or even an aversion to physical touch. And additionally, the only listeners the child has to communicate with are people who also know the signs that the child has been taught. Now, PECS is easy to teach because the behavior the child uses is always the same. They just grab a picture and they hand it to the listener. And because the pictures are clear and easy to see, anyone could be a helpful listener. Perhaps the best of both worlds, though, is using a talker electronic device. It allows for easy selection-based prompting like PECS, and it allows for anyone to be the listener. But if it does have a downside, it is that it is the same behavior used over and over by the child. They just select a different button to push each time. And another major deterrent to the use of talkers was always the costs related to it. But with the advent of reasonably priced iPad software, that has become far less of a barrier to most families. Once an augmentative system has been chosen, you then start to use effective prompting to teach the child to use the system to ask for their most strongly and frequently desired things. So if I'm going to help you teach your child to use augmentative communication to demand for things, I need a list of the things your child is most likely to want to ask for throughout the day. This list should include food and drink items, but it must also include items like toys and activities that the child enjoys. When deciding what demands we're likely to want to teach, it is very important that we consider exactly what we will call these items, as they will eventually become your child's first words. Teaching demands for words like more, please, help, and eat is not recommended. The reason is these words do not have standalone specific value to the child. They're reliant on other demands to be successful. For example, if I teach a child to say more, the sign or the PECS picture for more is only useful in relation to another demand for what they want more of. The same is true for the word eat. Eat what? Do you want to eat this? Do you want to eat this? And then the child is right back to pointing. The first words we teach should be specific names for specific items with no ambiguity. When they show you the picture of a train, they want their favorite train toy. If they make the sign that you taught them for Oreo cookies, then they want an Oreo. Well, I hope you enjoyed that excerpt from the podcast. If you want to listen to the full episode, click the card on your screen now. You know, some children have a more difficult time making requests or even expressing their needs, as well as their typical peers do. They may struggle with understanding, following directions, and completing tasks, which can make it challenging for them to get their needs met. And while these issues don't always correlate with ADHD, if a child is displaying symptoms of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, in addition to difficulty with language and communication, it may be worth having them evaluated for ADHD. I recently did a video on everything you need to know about ADHD in kids. If you're unfamiliar with what ADHD is or aren't sure whether your child might have it, which could be making attention to your teaching them language more difficult, I encourage you to watch that next video. So click on it and I'll see you there.